few moments ago, Buckingham Palace announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
Members of the British royal family are celebrated worldwide for their influence, heritage, and service, but their story is not without heartache. Alongside moments of triumph, they have endured devastating losses that shook the monarchy and moved millions to tears. From shocking accidents to untimely illnesses, these tragedies remind us that even royalty is not immune to fate's cruelty. So which 7 beloved UK royals met such heartbreaking ends, and how did their passing forever shape history? Stay tuned as we uncover their remarkable stories. Princess Diana, the People's Princess. Princess Diana's story is one of dazzling light, shadowed by relentless storms, a life that captured the world's attention not simply because of her title, but because of her rare ability to connect with people on a human level. Born Diana Spencer, in 1961 she seemed destined for a quiet, aristocratic life. Yet fate had other plans. When she married Prince Charles in 1981, the wedding was broadcast across the globe like a fairy tale, watched by millions who saw her as the young woman stepping into history. The crown placed her in the world's spotlight, but it was her own warmth, compassion, and vulnerability that made her unforgettable. Her royal role could have ended with ceremonial duties, yet Diana refused to remain a distant figure. She immersed herself in humanitarian causes, gravitating toward those whom society overlooked. At a time when fear and misinformation surrounded HIV and AIDS, she shattered stigma with a single gesture, shaking hands with patients without gloves. That moment was more than symbolism. It was courage turned into compassion, and it transformed public perception. Her relentless work against landmines later took her to Angola, where images of her walking through cleared minefields became an emblem of her fearless advocacy. These choices revealed not a figure bound by palace walls, but a woman determined to give her position meaning. Behind this public grace, however, Diana's personal life unraveled in ways the world could not ignore. Her marriage to Charles was strained, and the breakdown unfolded in the most public of ways, feeding tabloids that followed her every move. The press obsession became a second skin around her life. Flashbulbs, headlines, and endless scrutiny that often painted her struggles as spectacle. Diana's openness about her battles with mental health, eating disorders, and loneliness was unprecedented in royal circles, and it struck a chord with millions who saw in her not a distant princess, but a woman navigating pain with honesty. That honesty made her both vulnerable and powerful. The contradictions of her life, fairy tale bride, suffering wife, global humanitarian, only intensified public fascination. She became the people's princess, not because of her crown, but because she mirrored the hopes, fears, and heartbreaks of ordinary people in an extraordinary arena. Every appearance in hospitals, schools, and war zones seemed to peel back the idea of royalty as remote, showing instead a princess, unafraid to sit on the floor with children or listen to stories of grief. Then came Paris. On the night of August 31st, 1997, Diana's life was cut short in a car crash that shocked the world. The outpouring of grief was unlike anything Britain had seen in modern times. Bouquets carpeting the gates of Kensington Palace, mourners weeping openly in the streets, and questions hanging heavy about the role of both monarchy and media in her suffering. Her death was not just the loss of a princess, it was a rupture in the public's relationship with the royal family, a moment when admiration and anger fused into collective mourning. But could another monarch, long before Diana, have secured the crown's survival through her own battles with loss and duty? Grab a seat as we step back to uncover the royal figure who reshaped an entire era. Queen Victoria, the monarch who shaped an era. Queen Victoria, born in 1819, was a monarch whose reign came to define an entire age. Her presence on the throne was not simply ceremonial, it was an era in itself, an era of railways, factories, empire, and moral codes that would carry her name long after her passing. She ruled for 63 years, longer than any of her predecessors, and during those decades, Britain did not merely exist, it transformed. The Industrial Revolution tightened its grip, cities grew restless and loud, and the British Empire stretched across continents, binding together people and places under her crown. But Victoria's story was not only about grandeur, it was also about intimacy and devotion. Her marriage to Prince Albert was more than a royal union. It was a partnership that shaped both her personal life and her public role. Albert's influence touched exhibitions, architecture, and social reforms, weaving modern ideals into the fabric of her reign. For Victoria, he was both companion and counselor, and his presence gave her monarchy warmth that balanced its stern duty. When Albert died suddenly in 1861, the nation saw its queen shattered. Draped in black mourning, she withdrew from public appearances, retreating into private sorrow that would last for decades. Critics complained that the monarch had disappeared from view, but her grief also made her strangely relatable. She was no longer just a distant figure of authority. She was a woman whose heartbreak mirrored the sorrows of her people. Even in her seclusion, the world still carried her mark. The moral strictness of Victorian values set standards for family, society, and public life. The architecture of the period, with its imposing grandeur, became a mirror of Britain's confidence and ambition. And as the empire expanded, Britain's influence in global affairs became undeniable. Victoria stood at the center of it all, not always seen, but always felt. Her death on January 22, 1901, at Osborne House on the Isle of Wight, did more than close a life. It signaled the end of an era. The Victorian age had been one of power and transformation, but also of personal struggle and resilience. In her reign, the private and the public were inseparably bound, and through that union, she left a legacy that still lingers. King Edward VIII, the monarch who walked away. If Victoria's passing closed the door on a century of duty, Edward VIII's choices flung open a storm that shook the monarchy to its core. Unlike his grandmother, whose reign was anchored in endurance, Edward's legacy was forged in refusal, a refusal to sacrifice his personal happiness for the crown he briefly wore. Born in 1894, Edward grew up as the charismatic prince who captivated crowds with ease. He was stylish, approachable, and unlike many royals before him, seemed to carry a modern charm that thrilled the public. When he ascended the throne in January 1936, many imagined a new era taking shape, one where the monarchy would feel closer to the people and more in tune with the changing spirit of the 20th century. Yet, within months, that vision collapsed. The crisis came not from political upheaval or foreign threat, but from Edward's heart. His love for Wallis Simpson, an American woman twice divorced, clashed violently with the expectations of church, government, and tradition. The monarchy was not built to accommodate such a union, and as pressure mounted, Edward faced a choice: crown or companion. In December 1936, after just 11 months as king, he gave the throne to his brother and chose Wallis. His words, declaring he could not continue without the woman I love, echoed through Britain with both shock and disbelief. That decision unleashed more than gossip. It ignited a constitutional crisis. The monarchy, long seen as unshakable, was suddenly fragile. For the first time in modern history, the nation watched a king abandon his duty for personal desire. The aftermath was swift. Edward was stripped of the power he had briefly held and was given the title Duke of Windsor. From then on, his place was no longer at the heart of British life, but on its margins. Exile became his reality. Paris, not London, became the backdrop of his days with Wallis. Their life abroad was one of elegance, but also isolation, though they hosted dinners, mingled with high society, and appeared in photographs that traveled the world. Their bond with the royal family remained strained. Behind the glitter of soirees, Edward lived with the weight of knowing his choice had rewritten the monarchy's future. He died in Paris on May 28, 1972, remembered less for his short reign than for the choice that ended it. By abdicating, Edward cleared the path for his brother George VI to guide Britain through war, and father a queen who would redefine the monarchy. His legacy was not triumph, but disruption, a crown surrendered for love. But what do you think? Was Edward's sacrifice selfishness or the truest devotion? Stay tuned as we move to the next royal on our list, Princess Margaret. Princess Margaret Rose, Countess of Snowdon, was born in 1930. lived her entire life in the shadow of the crown, yet somehow she managed to draw the world's attention more than almost anyone else in the royal family. As the younger sister of Queen Elizabeth II, her destiny was never to reign, but her role in shaping the public imagination was undeniable. Where her sister represented duty, composure, and restraint, Margaret embodied glamour, passion, and rebellion. This contrast became the essence of her story, a life defined as much by dazzling charm as by painful constraint. From her earliest years, Margaret seemed set apart. Quick-witted and captivating, she had the ability to light up a room and keep all eyes fixed on her. As she grew, she became one of the most photographed women in Britain. Her fashion choices sparking trends, her social life filling newspaper columns. In the 1950s and 1960s, she was seen at theaters, nightclubs, and glittering dinners, a royal who blurred the line between aristocracy and celebrity. To many, she was Britain's first modern royal icon, elegant yet approachable, glamorous yet unpredictable. But behind the sparkle was a story of sacrifice. Her romance with Captain Peter Townsend, a divorced war hero who worked as an equerry in the royal household, captured the nation's heart. For a time, the public seemed ready to embrace their union. Yet, the weight of tradition, fueled by the Church of England's rigid stance on divorce, crushed their hopes. Margaret faced an impossible choice: follow her heart or honor her duty. Under immense pressure, she ended the relationship, leaving both herself and the nation with a lingering sense of loss. It was more than a personal heartbreak. It symbolized how deeply personal freedom could be sacrificed at the altar of monarchy. The end of that romance did not quiet her spirit. Instead, Margaret leaned further into the life she could control. She built circles of friends that included actors, musicians, and artists, enjoying the company of people who thrived outside royal rules. She smoked, she drank, and she partied late into the night, often provoking headlines that portrayed her as reckless. Yet even as critics sharpened their words, admirers saw in her a daring honesty. She refused to pretend she was something she was not. Her lifestyle, however, came at a price. Decades of smoking and heavy drinking left her health weakened. Strokes and illness shadowed her later years, diminishing the energy that once defined her. Yet even in frailty, she retained an aura of elegance, her name forever tied to the glamorous and complicated role she carved for herself. On February 9, 2002, Princess Margaret died at the age of 71, following a final stroke. With her passing, Britain lost not just a royal but a woman who had dared to defy the script written for her. She remains remembered as a figure of contradictions, rebellious yet loyal, dazzling yet troubled. A princess who never wore the crown but left an imprint just as enduring. But how did the monarchy shift from a defiant princess to a reluctant king? Stay tuned, because the twist of fate that followed reshaped Britain's royal story. King George VI. From the uncertainty left behind by Edward's abdication, emerged a figure no one had expected to wear the crown. George VI, born in 1895, had grown up in the shadow of stronger personalities, marked by a painful shyness and a speech impediment that seemed to set him apart from the confidence required of a ruler. Yet, destiny, indifferent to personal fears, pulled him forward in 1936, when his brother stepped aside, thrusting him into a role that demanded not just authority, but endurance. It was not on the grand stages of state banquets or in ceremonial robes that George VI proved himself, but in moments when his nation trembled. His halting words, delivered over the crackle of the wireless, carried a weight beyond fluency. Each pause and struggle reminded the public that their king was human, vulnerable as they were, yet unyielding in resolve. During the Blitz, when London's nights were torn apart by falling bombs, his addresses became beacons of steadiness. People huddled in shelters or in the ruins of their homes did not hear weakness in his stammer. They heard courage speaking through difficulty. His reign, defined by war, reshaped the monarchy's image. Instead of distant grandeur, he embodied an ordinary man burdened with extraordinary duty, walking through bombed streets with his family, refusing to abandon Buckingham Palace even as it too was scarred by German air raids. These choices turned him into a symbol of resilience, a monarch who shared the risks of his people rather than watching from afar. Yet behind the steadfast image was a body weakened by strain, years of pressure, heavy smoking, and the endless demands of kingship carved into his health. In February 1952, at the age of 56, his life ended suddenly from coronary thrombosis. Britain woke to the shock of losing not just a king, but a figure who had guided them through their darkest hours. The throne, in that instant, passed to his daughter, Elizabeth, only 25 at the time, whose reign would unfold into one of the most iconic in modern history. George VI's story, brief but intense, was not one of ambition fulfilled, but of duty shouldered against all odds, leaving a quiet strength that still lingers in the memory of the crown. Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. From the moment he stepped into public life, Philip of Greece and Denmark seemed destined to live between two worlds, one shaped by his turbulent royal upbringing and another defined by his unwavering service beside Elizabeth. Born in 1921 on the island of Corfu, his early years were marked by exile, displacement, and a family scattered across Europe. Yet these uncertainties hardened him into a man of discipline, setting the stage for his remarkable role as Britain's longest-serving royal consort. When he renounced his Greek and Danish titles to marry the future queen in 1947, it was not just a personal sacrifice, but a decisive break from his past. He took on the name Mountbatten, pledged loyalty to Elizabeth, and embarked on a life where his identity would be inseparable from hers. For over 7 decades, he stood firmly at her side, shaping the monarchy not through ceremony alone, but through sheer stamina and dedication. His presence was felt everywhere, from Buckingham Palace to remote corners of the Commonwealth. Philip attended more than 22,000 solo engagements, a staggering testament to his endurance and sense of duty. Yet, beyond the formality of royal obligations, he carved out his own legacy. With his blunt humor and famously sharp wit, he became both admired and controversial, a man unafraid of speaking his mind, often with a candor that startled diplomats and delighted crowds. But perhaps his most enduring contribution came not in words, but in action. In 1956, he founded the Duke of Edinburgh's Award, a program designed to challenge young people, foster resilience, and cultivate leadership. What began in Britain grew into a global movement, touching millions of lives across more than 130 countries, a legacy of empowerment that transcended his royal title. Even in his later years, as his public appearances became less frequent, Philip remained a commanding presence within the royal family. His final chapter came quietly at Windsor Castle on April 9, 2021, just 2 months before his 100th birthday. The nation mourned not only the loss of a prince, but the end of an era defined by steadfast devotion. Yet as the royal stage shifted once more, another figure prepared to step into the spotlight, one whose quiet strength would leave a mark just as enduring. Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. Born in 1900, she did not grow up expecting a crown, nor the heavy weight of history pressing upon her shoulders. But fate had other plans. When her husband, the shy and stammering Prince Albert, suddenly found himself crowned George VI in 1936 after the Abdication crisis, Elizabeth was thrust into a role that demanded both strength and grace. And strength she gave, more than anyone anticipated. It was in the darkest days of World War II that her quiet resolve transformed into something legendary. While bombs rained down on London, many believed the royal family would retreat to safety in the countryside. Instead, Elizabeth stood firm beside her husband, refusing to abandon the city or its people. Her defiant words, "The children won't go without me. I won't go without the king, and the king will never go," became a lifeline for a nation clinging to courage in the face of devastation. Buckingham Palace itself was bombed, yet she insisted that the destruction only allowed her to look the East End in the eye. In that moment, she ceased to be merely a queen consort. She became a symbol of endurance. The war ended, but her duty never did. After George VI's untimely death in 1952, Elizabeth was left widowed at just 51, her daughter Elizabeth ascending to the throne as queen. Yet rather than fade into the shadows, the Queen Mother carried on as a reassuring presence through the decades, embodying continuity at a time of rapid change. Even as generations passed, Her warm public image and steadfast devotion to the monarchy kept her deeply beloved among the British people. She lived a century and a year, passing away in 2002 at the remarkable age of 101, just 7 weeks after the death of her daughter, Princess Margaret. Her funeral drew the gaze of the world, but for many in Britain, she had long since been immortal, not because of her crown, but because of her refusal to bow to fear. But what do you think truly defines the legacy of these royals? Their triumphs, their struggles, or the way they are remembered today? We'd like to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like and subscribe.